Well, we are back. We are back, and for this episode, we're going to talk about fatherhood. Yep, part three. I'm keeping it going. Part three, and in this particular one, we're gonna look at blended families. Blended families. So hey, kick back and let's start the show. Come and listen, laugh, and link up on real life topics and subjects that matter to you here on the conversation with Corinthus Alston. All right. Welcome to the conversation. Without the conversation, we can't have the understanding. Well, today we're going to jump into this thing about fatherhood. Yep, part three. But we're going to look at it from the perspective of the blended family. And to help me do that, I've asked a good friend of mine, he's in the blended family, to help me dive into this conversation. So without further ado, Mr. David Watkins. Come on, let's give him a hand clap.
How you doing, my brother? How's it going?
Oh, man, I'm doing good. I can't complain. Well, I want to complain, but I can't because God's been too good to complain.
That's right.
So yeah, but I wanted to continue this conversation around fatherhood, particularly blended families. So I want to look at fatherhood in general. Your thoughts, like I said, you have grown children, your thoughts of how you see how fatherhood has changed from 10, 15 years ago, some of the things that, oh my God, as a dad, you had to really think about compared to today and some of the issues that are involved with fatherhood, because there's different issues from 15 years than today. So come on. Let me hear what you got to say about it. Let me hear what.
Well, if we're getting off into, what is the difference, now, say 15 years, later versus, when my kids are much younger. Of course, the dynamics have changed. My kids are, literally in their early to mid 20s now. So, there are a lot of different challenges, in this day and time that we did not have, when they were younger. Granted, what they see on TV, what they hear on the radio, what's acceptable, in their eyesight today, that sometimes we have conversations about that's acceptable to these, to their generation, as it relates to a lot of different things,
So when you went into this, and again, everybody being transparent, I've been divorced, you've been in a relationship, you've been divorced.
Right.
When you walk into that blended family, right? When you said, "Ooh, here's the woman that I'm going to bring in," how does that introduction happen? I mean, from a fatherhood perspective, because there's two components. There's you being a father to your children, and if they have children, you being a father to their children. So I mean, is that just a blind walk in? Is there like you do the introduction and you just pray for the best?
Well, you know what? The reality of it is it's a growing experience, Corey. You don't, it all depends on the dynamics of what you're dealing with. In our case, we dealt with a lot of external issues, coming into the marriage, blending, my two sons and then my daughter. And at the beginning, our sons didn't live with us. This was a process. They lived with my ex-wife at that time. So, it took a minute before we got them. And right when we got married, is when we brought them in. And the reality was, and I did not know this, but I learned some years later that just the pressure setting, because you got to remember we had my daughter before my sons came to live with me. So that's what my wife knew.
Oh,
that's
wow.
what I knew. Okay, but when the boys came, because my wife loved me, she really didn't tell me about the pressure she was feeling. And, I was working, all sorts of hours, kind of trying to advance my career, different things of that sort. And she had a lot of pressure on her that I absolutely had no idea about. Not to mention, like I said, the external influence of not wanting, that motherly role to be there for the kids, and those challenges of comparing, I had to kind of be a mediator. I had to be a husband, had to be a father, co-parent, also, working on that strained relationship, because things weren't perfect, at that time. And then
So,
not only
so,
that, yeah,
so,
go right
how
ahead.
did you deal with? So, here's the thing that I notice, and when people walk into that, do people ever
Mhm.
have that upfront conversation about how do we, how do we discipline our children? Because now they're our children. They're not your children. They're not my children. They're our children.
Right.
Do you stumble into that? That's something you stumble
We,
into, or do you think more people should have that conversation up front? Hey, we're coming together. We need to have a real conversation of if so and so do something wrong,
mhm,
what does that mean
mhm,
if I'm in this role as
mhm.
as a father?
I believe wholeheartedly, and we had to, I had to learn that. Me and my wife both had to learn that again as a growth experience. I do believe you definitely need to have that conversation when you're in a blended family, when they're, the mother, whether it's an ex-wife or it's the mother of your child or it's a father, or ex-husband, father of your child or ex-husband. You need to have that conversation because what will occur is that it can cause a strain, between you and your wife, you and the mom, that are presently, parenting those children. And I can just give you one example. I remember my daughter was young
Mm-hmm.
and she had did something that was a little bit disrespectful. And I remember tapping her on her backside. I know my wife won't care about me sharing this. So, but I remember my wife's first response was to, tap me. And I looked back at her like, wait, what are you doing? But it was a protective measure,
Yeah, yeah.
because
I mean,
that,
no, that's
we
understandable.
understand it was a reflex, and
Yes.
we had to really seriously talk about how we're going to discipline our kids. So the way that we ultimately ended up disciplining our children was, I technically handled the physical discipline with my two boys, and she handled it with my daughter. But when it came to the conversations and
Mm-hmm.
chastising them and talking, all that was open. That was, open game. We could talk to them, and we had to let them know that we were both on the same page because kids have a tendency to want to, play games.
Play
A lot
games.
of
Yep.
times they
One
bring in
against
the
the other.
external,
Mom
they
against
bring in
dad.
it,
Yep.
yeah, they run to the external parent, and they start telling them things. The next thing you know, you're dealing with that headache, and you're trying to, douse that fire out. So, a lot of times, just through my growth, my experience is absolutely, I would say, have that discussion because we were forced into that discussion just because we hadn't had it at the beginning.
Oh wow. Oh, so
Times,
do you think it's better to have that conversation, up front? Just put it out there because you know how it is. You're dating, you get to meet the kids, you take the kid, you going through I call
right,
it the courting ritual, right?
right, mhm,
And then
right,
that rubber meets the road where you're like, you know what, we're gonna do this. We're gonna become a family.
mhm,
And I think
right,
sometimes when you make that cognitive decision to do that,
mhm.
there's a whole bunch of conversations that have to happen. Like how
Oh,
much
absolutely.
the external parent, um, 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 discipline, how do we talk to the kids together? I think there's like this whole thing. I think people like forget about. They say I do.
Right. No,
They
yeah.
say I do. Kids get in the
Mm-hmm.
house, something happens.
Mm-hmm.
Something
Right.
happens.
And, and no, go right ahead, my brother.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I was just thinking. Do you think it's better to like during the when you're either contemplating moving to that next level, you start to sort of kind of touch those bases. Before you do the I do. So this way, everybody is on the same page. Going
Well,
in. Now, some things you're gonna stumble around. That just happens, right?
I do, and it all depends on the dynamic of what you're dealing with externally. It deals with the other parents or the mother or the father of that child. It deals with where their head is, where their rationale is. If their rationale isn't on a level that will yield good results and not create strife or drama, then you're cool. You can talk about openly with it. Probably all of the individuals, how discipline will go forth. But if you all are not on the same page, that right there is where, that parent, that's why I said for everybody, there's always a different recipe. In my case, the recipe that we came up with was the fact that we had to say, this is how we're going to discipline our children. Now, talking about it before we get married, I think is probably a great, how can I say, a direction to travel. We didn't do that. And like you say, a lot of times you don't know. So if I can be helpful to somebody and give them a little tidbit of advice, I would say, yes, you do need to have those hard conversations, because you don't want any surprises thinking in the back of your mind, you know what, if he disciplines my child or she disciplines my child, I'm going to be all good with it. Or the other parents or mother or father is going to be good with it, because that's not going to always be the case. And before you know it, you're going to find yourself in a whole lot of, drama. And trust me,
no, and that's why, and that's why I want to have the conversation. I want to have the conversation because, like I said, I was doing my statistics, and it's literally in the last 10 years, blended families have jumped 150%. And so you have to think about, wow, if it jumped 150%, that means when 9 times out of 10, you go into a relationship, someone has a child somewhere. One way or the other. And you have to have that conversation. You have to have that conversation. So if you had to give like 3 pieces of advice, let's say you're mentoring a young man, he's dating a young lady, she has a child, he has a child. What would you say to him?
Well, the number one thing that I would say is, I could probably even use one of my sons as an example. If he was to, get into a relationship with a young lady that had a child, with another, young man, or had been married before, the number one thing that I would definitely tell him is to make sure that, the relationship between that mother and that father, make sure where that relationship is at. Make sure that, you being mature, you talk with her and say, hey, let's have, is that person in a place or position where they're willing to talk, they're rational. I want to know what, when it comes to me as a father, what my son or even any young man may be getting into. You have to be careful and understand what you're getting into. And at the end of the day, if you're dealing with someone who's dealing with an irrational person, like I said, again, that's going to change the dynamics. And that's really saying, hey, what are you putting yourself on the line to deal with when you get into this relationship? Because blended families, like they all don't always start out the same. And a lot of them don't make it for a lot of different reasons, whether it's external or internal. So the tidbits I would give that young man is to make sure that y'all have an open, transparent conversation around whether it's going to involve exactly what we just talked about earlier, discipline, how we're going to function together, as a couple, and then also with inclusion from that, that other parent. Those are the conversations that you definitely want to have, because you want to make sure going into that relationship that you have all your ducks in a row, if possible. If not, you're going to have to rely on God to work a lot of that stuff out, which may require cutting some things off, or, establishing some form of, where you may be the only parent that's interacting with that other parent until you all can get on the same page. So there's a lot of different things, Corey, that happens, and that's what I would give fair warning, because you want to know what you're getting into at the very beginning. You don't want to jump right into it.
So what? So I'm glad you said inclusion, because in a future episode, I'm actually talking to the women, right? I'm talking to the women from a different perspective, but about inclusion. But as a father who is in the blended family, and there is another father, there's another man or male, because the child has a father, has this birth father.
Right.
How do you feel when it comes to Father's Day? See, because I know it's deep and it's personal. It's deep and personal because you're there, you putting in the work. But do you still think it's fair? I'm just trying to be fair to make sure that that child understands they do have a biological father, and that yes, they may not be part of their life all the time, that they should celebrate them as well.
I do. My situation was different. And my marriage.
Yeah, yeah,
With my
yeah.
the situation was definitely different. There wasn't that relationship, there, and I had to actually, grow up with, being that father figure to my daughter, but also looking and witnessing the pain of that other biological parent not being there.
Yeah.
But what it was, it formed our relationship to the point that, I didn't say, hey, she has to take my last name. I didn't, anything like that on her. I would talk to her, and still to this day, would talk to her about, the love of having love for your father. But that wasn't the dynamic of our situation. Our situation relates to a lot, probably as a lot of people can relate to my situation a little bit, because it was totally different. When it came to
I get it. I get it. I was just thinking that because in my first marriage, I had a stepson, right? I thought of him like a son, and it was a challenge. One of the challenges, like you said, you got to always have those conversations.
Absolutely.
Was that we were doing something, and yes, Father's Day, he gave me presents, but I said, I understand that, but there was a rift in their relationship, the biological father, and I said, all because he doesn't know how to be there. When you get older, you still need to understand that that's your father, and you have other siblings by him, and in order for you to have a full life, and with those siblings,
absolutely,
you have to mend that relationship. It wasn't I'm just so it wasn't an encouragement, but it was like, hey, I had to take into account, that's reality. That is the same for you have boys, they got a mom,
right?
And sometimes there's still interaction. Yes, you have your wife, but if something happened to one of your sons, you have to have that interaction.
Oh, absolutely. It's no other. But you have to have an understanding wife too, and I think
See, I was waiting for that. Yep.
Yeah, if you don't have an understanding wife,
you gotta have. I mean, because because I have a daughter, and there was times where my daughter had she would have so I have a granddaughter. She would have a party and invite her mom. And said, "Oh, Dad, won't you show up?" So you guys,
right. All of them in the room together. I get it.
Exactly. And I had to explain to my daughter. I said, "I love you very much." And I said, and of course, everyone got to a court. Like you said, you got to have those conversations.
But I'm gonna tell you one thing that's funny too, Corey, and this is where we've grown to. Even with my ex-wife, my wife and my ex-wife talk more than I talk to her. They talk. We
that's
prayed.
Growth, though. But that's growth, though.
We had to grow there. That came 13, 14 years later.
Yes.
What was amazing in that growth, and I can share this, when you go to the basketball games, they were young. When they came, they were 6 and 4 years old when we got there. So, but yet they still went with their mom every other weekend. But, even at the games, we didn't sit together. We sat in different spaces. And then as the years started going, and as we started, learning to mend the relationship of what occurred and what happened, then you start finding us sitting together in the roles together. So that's the other part, that if I can help anybody, you want to make sure that, like I said, you have those hard, discussions. You try to, create some form of where you all can have that kind of relationship. And I'll say this again, it all depends on where the other parent, the one that is not the biological parent, is at. You have to be completely open, ready to compromise, humble yourself. Because like I said, my wife, if it wasn't for my wife, I would have had a lot of moments that I would probably regret it. By her talking me off that ledge or talking me down and saying, "Baby, no, this is not what we're gonna do. I'm gonna take a seat back and they can call me Mrs. Michelle, not Mom." So it's sacrifices and it's compromises you have to make.
Wow. I'm telling you, man, it's when you said that, when you said that, Miss Michelle, I remember having that same conversation with my daughter, calling my wife Miss Kelly. Because because when you get to those group events, you gotta have you want to have everything distinguished. Okay, you don't want no type of confusion, unnecessary confusion, man. No, this was great. See, this is what I like. I like having real conversations with people about stuff that just like we really don't think about. And that's why I chose to do the Fatherhood series. I said, because, man, we see all the other stuff, but, dads, we go through stuff, too.
Man, like you wouldn't believe.
We go through stuff. We go through stuff, too. But, no, I really appreciate. Now, you have to come back. Now, because I got you on here. You're going to have to be a frequent flyer now, because I got some topics coming up that are just not just on fatherhood, but just general topics on living, where I just want a brother who I just have a conversation with, like, hey, have you thought about this?
Absolutely.
And really, what does this mean?
Anytime.
Because I want to. So I'm gonna give you a hint on it. So I want to have a conversation about old school. All right, and so I'm gonna bring you back. But one of the topics I want to talk about: did you allow? Remember, when we grew up, you couldn't go over you couldn't go visit your friend's house unless your parents met the mama and the dad.
All I do about time you couldn't. You had to be home for the street lights came on. I relate.
So I just want you to know we gonna have those. We gonna want to have a conversation about that, about what has changed, because a lot has changed.
A whole lot.
Facebook, internet, Snapchat, twerking, TikTok.
Right. No, you're right. Those influences for this generation. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. I know we're talking about fatherhood, but you remember we had the one phone that was in the kitchen. So when you
now, if you messed up, you had to hang it back up and then do it again.
And then when you sitting there, your mama, daddy, cousin, niece, they looking at you while you talking.
Right. Absolutely.
So man, we definitely got to have you back, man. We definitely got to have you back, because, like I said, I got a lot of good conversations that I want to have, and you definitely got to have you as a frequent flyer. All right,
absolutely.
All right. So everyone, again, thank you. Well, that's a wrap. That's a wrap, guys. So again, without the conversation, we can't have the understanding. Until next time. Thank you for being part of the Conversations with Corinthus Alston, brought to you by CKJ Live. Come back and visit again to share more real-life topics and stories that matter to you. And remember, without the conversation, we can't have the understanding.